Let's start at the very top of the draft. It seemed very unlikely a couple days ago, but the Browns took Baker Mayfield with the #1 pick. Afterwards, Baker said, quote, "I want to be the guy who comes in and helps change the culture of the locker room." So, Joel, did you like the pick?
I did like the pick, and little did we know that it was John Dorsey and Skip Bayless making the pick at #1. You've been making the case this entire process that Baker should be and would be the #1 quarterback. He was last night. I've been a big believer in Baker Mayfield, having covered him in the last couple of seasons. I will tell you that this guy performs best when the pressure is the most and the lights are the brightest. Look at what he did in some of the biggest environments in college football. At Ohio State against a very good defense. He was brilliant in that game. Urban Meyer saying it was one of the best performances he's ever had played against him from an opposing quarterback. He was great on the road against ranked opponents at Oklahoma. He was 7-0 in those games. And then when you matched him up against these other quarterbacks in this draft, and you looked at what they did in the second half of games that were one-possession games, which is what the NFL is, Shannon. You know that, right? Mm-hmm. He was brilliant. A rating of over 200. He threw 11 touchdowns in that situation. No other quarterback in this draft had thrown more than 4. So when you put that performance behind the bravado, behind the fact that Cleveland is desperate to win football games, I think that's what ultimately made the selection of Baker Mayfield. And I think it was a good selection. Listen, there's going to be critics. There's going to be comparisons to quarterbacks that have played there in the past, and I think unfavorable comparisons. But this kid wins football games. He's done it at every level, and I really liked the selection up there.
For this to be uniformity, because you got Baker Mayfield, who's a 6-foot-tall quarterback with some maturity issues and some off-field red flags. So how did they come to this conclusion of doing away with all this history, 6-foot tall quarterback and his off the field issues, to say, you know what, we don't care, we're taking this guy #1?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it takes some guts, right? In particular because of what you talked about. Listen, you said in the last 15 years there had only been one quarterback selected in the first round under 6'1", and that quarterback was Johnny Manziel. So this franchise now is the only one to do it in the last 15 years. I think that we're starting to see a bigger sample size, however, Shannon, of guys that can succeed at that height and stature. We saw Case Keenum have an excellent season for Minnesota. We've seen Drew Brees win the Super Bowl. We've seen Russell Wilson win the Super Bowl. And so now, with where the game is moving, I think people are more comfortable than they used to be with guys that are 6'1". But I will tell you, I talked with several teams down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and before Baker's official weigh-in and height measurement, there were some nervous teams because they knew that they were not going to be able to sell, whether it was to their GM or to their owner, that like, hey, we should take a quarterback that high who's under 6 foot. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many guys that were right before his weigh-in and measurement, they were like, please be 6 foot, please be 6 foot. And, of course, he was. He's just as tall as Drew Brees, taller than Russell Wilson. But it's more than that because, remember, he doesn't get balls batted down at the line of scrimmage. He's been very durable, and the guy wins with touch and anticipation over the middle of the field, and that's really what it takes to win.
Yeah, Joel, you also loved Sam Darnold. So are you still okay that Cleveland took the quarterback that you had rated slightly lower than Sam Darnold with the first pick?
It was slightly. You know, I think that it was razor thin for me with those two guys at the top, and I think it was more preference. I was more comfortable with Darnold because I thought he was a safer selection. Skip, quite frankly, it's going to be a little bit rough in the fan sentiment type of mentality with Baker Mayfield in Cleveland because of the comparisons to Johnny Manziel. Even if I don't think that they apply at all, that's going to be brought up. So that's one of the reasons I thought Sam was a better fit for Cleveland. But with him now in New York, I just want to turn my focus there if I could.
Yep.
That's a great fit for Sam Darnold. Skip, this guy gets to learn from Josh McCown, who's one of the best men in the National Football League. I was with him in Detroit, and he's a great mentor. It's a good fit for Sam Darnold, and I think having slid to #3, that fan base is probably more excited than they would have been with, let's say, a Josh Rosen at 3. They didn't think they were going to get this kid. He's probably the safest quarterback, excellent player who made USC better every time he was on the football field. And if I was a Jets fan, I would be overjoyed this morning.
I'm not sure I would, Joel, and I'll tell you why. I'm starting to wonder if Sam Darnold is too great of a young man, as in he tries too hard and he doesn't have that gear to be able to channel his competitive fire into performance instead of turnovers, because he clearly was pressing last year, trying to live up to Heisman hype, trying to lift a team that was just barely above average into national contention. And you know what happened? Interceptions go from 9 to 13. Sacks go all the way up to 26 sacks last year, and obviously led the nation in lost fumbles. That's just pressing. That's trying too hard. And I fear going to New York in that media market, he's going to have a lot of pressure on him. He's still a very high pick. I don't know if he can cope with that. If he could, like Baker Mayfield just embraces it. He's going to give LeBron a run on social media for his money. That's how Baker is. He's going to be on social media every day like LeBron. He'll out LeBron.
No.
Yes, he will. Yep.
One town.
No.
That belongs to LeBron.
No,
We're going to welcome Baker with open arms.
He's going to challenge.
But that's our city.
But LeBron will be gone after a couple of months.
Stop.
Ahead.
We're not talking about
So, Joel, your response about Darnold's makeup.
Yeah, so I would say that we've got 3 quarterbacks that, I would say 2 are on the precipice of a lot of success and another that has been, at the top level of the game, although hasn't won a Super Bowl, that all threw more interceptions than Sam Darnold in their last year of college football. Jameis Winston, Deshaun Watson, who you loved, and Matt Ryan. They all threw more interceptions than Darnold did in their last year at their respective teams. So I think turnovers to a point for a quarterback that is that highly regarded and is the catalyst for the offense in college, they've got to make things happen. You got to understand now, USC gets a pass and everyone's like, oh, they're always the most talented team. They weren't last year. Their roster was really poor. Their offensive line was terrible, and they had injuries. Their schematics were very predictable at times because of some of that inexperience that was surrounding Sam Darnold. The only other player that was really worth his salt was Ronald Jones, who's probably going to get selected tonight in the NFL draft, rounds 2 through 3. But Sam was pressing not just because he wanted to prove people right or prove his evaluation correct, but more than that, Skip, he was pressing because he had to. When you're forced into that mode, I think that turnovers start to occur, in particular when your game plan has become a bit predictable, and that's clearly the case when I speak with all the defensive coordinators, when I evaluated USC. By the end of the year, they were incredibly predictable. That's why Ohio State got after them with their defense led by Greg Schiano and those great pass rushers. That's why Sam struggled in that game. But I will say this about Sam Darnold. Guy is tough. He never complains. Whether it was at Washington State on a weeknight when he was getting beat up and they eventually lost the game, he was always keeping them in the game. And people forget, he threw for 400 yards against Ohio State. I mean, he was doing his part. Listen, I know that those can be construed as excuses, but that's how I would answer your question. He was forced into that mode most of the season.
10 years from now, who's the better quarterback, Darnold or Mayfield?
Oh, my gosh. I'm really hoping both of them are impactful, right? I mean, but if I had to bet money, I can't bet against Baker. I covered him too much. Right? Like I just can't, because he took risks with the football yet didn't turn the football over.
Yeah.
He always won the game. He was great in one-possession games. His ebbs and flows. Shannon, it's interesting. You've seen guys that like I want my quarterback to be even-keeled, and I don't want him to ride the wave. Well, riding the wave is only bad when the lows depress you. See, when the lows motivate you, that's actually a good thing, that you're kind of an up-and-down guy. And Baker's a guy that when something bad happens, that just increases the size of the chip on his shoulder. And it motivates him to come back in a competitive sense and prove people wrong. So if you were forcing me to choose, I would choose Baker, because I can't bet against him. I've covered him too much, man. The guy's brilliant. Magic man. As Gus would say, I got to say, Gus Johnson would say, the magic man, Baker Mayfield.
So I completely agree with you. Just on pure college performance, it wasn't even close to me. Baker was much better than the other 4 quarterbacks in question here. But to Shannon's consistent point on this show, not only was he about 6'1.5" tall, but he had way too many red flags. And yet I believe that Cleveland said some of the red flags are just competitive fire. The crotch grab, the drilling the TCU player with the warm-up pass, planting the flag in the middle of the Ohio State's Horseshoe Stadium. That's all just competitive fire. Now, nobody can defend the public intoxication, running from the police. Yet, even though I know Baker loves him some nightlife, he's not Manziel-like there. Johnny loved Vegas more than he loved Cleveland. Johnny did not study, didn't care about the X's and O's, and Baker is a film nerd. He will bury his head in the playbook. When it's time to play football, he studies football. So I told Shannon earlier, I'm 51-49 that Baker will stay out of trouble in ways Johnny could not stay out of trouble.
That's not a high percentage.
I know, but
that's exactly what I said.
That's what I'm taking him number one overall because I'm 51-49.
Woo! I guess. You know what I hope he does? Shannon, wouldn't you love this as a teammate if he took a Browns flag, ran out on his first game, and planted it at the 50, like he did with that OU flag at Ohio State?
Yeah, but he better win some games. All that crotch grabbing and it all comes to the NFL is about winning. They don't care what you do as long as you win.
True.
I mean, he reminds you a little bit of Phillip Rivers because you know Phillip Rivers is getting the defender's face. I mean, he's not going to do all that other things, but he's a trash talker and to get in the guy's face.
And Johnny is, Baker is the biggest trash talker. He's constant. He's going to motor mouth. He's going to be the next Shannon Sharpe in the National Football League. But the problem is he is a franchise quarterback with the number one overall pick, right?
Yeah, the defensive lineman couldn't get to me. They can get to him.
Okay, but what did Charlie Weiss tell us on this show? Baker Mayfield has things I can't teach or coach, which is why Charlie said a long time ago, I'm taking him number one overall because you can't teach leadership, competitive fire. You can't teach the rub-off factor, the swagger, the body language, just the spit in your eye guy that is Baker Mayfield. You just can't, you can't create that. It's in him. And that's why John Dorsey said, I want this kid to take over my franchise. And I don't think he's going to sit sit still very long behind Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, I don't think that he will either. And a guy that I don't think is going to sit very long either. And I know we haven't mentioned him, and I don't mean to take a tangent here, but I think Arizona got a steal with Rosen sliding down. And I tell you, I interviewed him on the radio last night. We were doing the radio broadcast, myself, Kurt Menefee, Jay Glazer, and Chris Spielman. And that guy sat down, and of all the other draft picks, it was like, oh, sense of relief, isn't this exciting? He sat down, and there was determination and fire in Josh Rosen's eyes. Watch out for Rosen. I think that could be a really good selection when we're looking at this 5 years from now.
So, Joel, are you sure he doesn't talk a better game than he plays?
Well, we're going to find out because I tell you that answer. Chris Spielman asked him like, "Hey, what'd you think? You know, how'd it feel?" And he looked dead in his eyes, and without pause, he gave that answer that you have seen now, you know, across social media and print. I thought 9 other teams made a mistake, and I was like, "Whoa, all right, okay, here we go." And it's to your point, though, Shannon. If you produce, guys are going to love that. If you win games, they're going to love that type of mentality. It's the old Nuke LaLoosh Crash Davis line. If you win 20 games, you can have mold on your shower shoes. You can do whatever you think. People think it's colorful. But until you produce, they're just going to say that it's talk.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. And be sure to check out more of the best clips from Undisputed or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.